Initializing. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the 40k Fireside podcast. I'm David Gaylord, and I'm joined by my good friend Vic Vijay. Together, we discuss 40k and the meta from our perspective, along with events we've recently been to and those that have got coming up. So come on down to the Fireside and listen. Alrighty, 40k Fireside episode, I think it's 47, but you'll see, well, you won't see if you're a podcast listener, but if you're watching on YouTube, you'll see I've got our good friend here, Brian Siepp, who is, of course, part of Team Ignite and a fantastic player. The reason why I've got Brian today is that Brian and I are traveling to Amsterdam for the Eurotrash Cup 8-man team tournament, which is a really exciting tournament. It's something that we've had in the making for well, not us organizing the tournament, but we've had a team kind of loosely put together for about a year, isn't it, Brian? So it feels good that it's finally coming to fruition this weekend. So yeah, pleasure to have you on, Brian. It's been a while. I think the last time we were talking, when you were on, you were talking about, I'm going to say orcs.
Usually is. You guys feel like, it's been too long. The people demand an orc episode. When you pause it, you got to make an appearance.
There we go, and it'll be orcs again probably as well today. But Brian has been around a lot in the European team scene. I think probably the most person out of our team, apart from I guess I shouldn't say that, but the most UK person out of our team for sure. You regularly attended WTC and the Pira Cup and other kind of Eastern European events as well, right, Brian?
Yeah, for sure. Whenever I get an opportunity to participate in a team event, I want to, and I try to. I've been traveling more and more to Europe, participate in those. It's the first time at this particular event, but super excited.
Nice. Yeah, so the Eurotrash Cup is a 10-man team event. So about 80 players and, give or take coaches. And it's full of national teams apart from our team, which is the mercenary team. And I'll just run through the list of teams. You should be able to see it. We've got Team Belgium United, which is our team, which I'll go through in a bit. We've got Team France, Team Germany, Team Iceland, Ireland, Luxembourg, Team Netherlands, Team Norway, and Team Poland. So a lot of the really big hitters there. I mean, just from this, we're probably missing USA and England, but it's primarily a European-based tournament. So, I mean, all of these teams are looking like they're playing their 6 out of 8 WTC starters. So they're throwing their best foot forward. France has its usual people. Germany has almost everyone I recognize, aside from maybe Arn or Malt. And Belgium has, of course, Liam, Guillaume, Gabriel, and Johan, I think, is playing there. No, he's not. But
ours there as well.
Oh, yeah. And then Poland is bringing a bunch of great people as well. So it's going to be a pretty stacked tournament, and it's going to be a fun tournament because we are playing a little bit of a weird team. As you might have seen, our team is all Liams. Now, the reason why we've all us up Liam is I don't actually know the story. Maybe you know the story better than I, Brian. So can you run me through what the history of Belgium and Belgium United kind of is and how it formed, I guess?
So it's a bit of a WTC inside joke. When Belgium, who was the host for WTC, kind of first started looking to form a team, they had a rather sizable amount of mercs associated with it. They've since obviously gone down and are represented by Belgian boys now, but because of that, it's always kind of an ongoing joke of how many mercs the Belgian team has. And so we've decided to form Team Belgium United, and in an effort to pay homage to the grandfather himself. We all went with different variations of Liam VSL. I myself being Liam USB.
Yes, so we've got Liam Al Gaib from Dune 2. Won't spoil anything if you haven't watched it. Fantastic movie. That is John Lennon. So that is John Lennon playing Tyranids. We've got Liam ASL, which is actually Anthony Vanella playing World Eaters. We've got Liam BDE, who is actually Jack Harpster playing Adeptus Custodes. We've got Liam DGL, is Astra Militarum, and that's myself playing. We've got Liam DTF, who is actually Ennis Wilson playing Space Marines. We've got Liam GSC, which is actually Myson from Team Poland, and Team Ignite, of course, playing GSC. And we've got Liam SSL, who is Typhus from Team Poland, playing Adeptus Sororitas or Sisters. And we've got Liam USB, who is Brian, of course, playing Orcs. So we have all of those names. I guess if you're in the competitive circles, you should probably be relatively familiar with. All these players are absolutely exceptionally good at the game. And I remember when we made the messenger group chat about like a year ago or something, I think. I was like, oh, well, I'm the small fish in this pond because
Like
our
we all
team is
feel like
absolutely
the small
stacked.
fish.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we all feel like the small fish in that particular group, which is probably a sign that you're among peers, eh?
Yeah, exactly. So I thought what would be really good is Ennis Wilson put together this kind of graphical to display what the faction breakdown is. And I thought, so we had the Pira Cup, a couple of weeks back, maybe a month ago now.
Mm.
And that's always kind of a nice showcase in terms of where teams are at. And that was very soon after the balanced data slate had dropped, right? So I think there's like a week submission after the balanced data slate, or maybe 2 weeks, for example. So that was a really good litmus test of where we thought the teams were at, all the national teams, that is, and what kind of build and archetypes they thought were really strong. Necrons, was it going to be Hypercrypt, or was it going to be Canoptic Court? And then a bunch of variations of the sub-factions within that 5 to 8 slot of, what do we actually think is going to be the strongest thing here? And that yielded, I think, a lot of good data in a tournament setting rather than your just regular practice setting, which you would like to think is the same thing, but is not necessarily always the same. So if you're a podcast listener, what I'm actually showing here is a graphic of each respective national team and the factions which they've picked. So you'll notice there is some factions that are obviously a lot lower picked and some that are really popular. So Brian, I thought, what were your initial takes on the distribution here? Was there any, I guess, A, what do you think of the top end? And B, were there any surprises? And then C, I'll remind you what C is. Is there anything that you think is missing or is kind of going under the radar here?
Yeah, I think the top end of the distribution is pretty much what you might expect. I mean, I think if you asked anybody to tell you kind of what are the top three armies in no particular order, the majority of people right now for teams are going to say Guard, Space Marines, and Necrons, and
Mhm.
those are the only armies that are represented 9 out of 10, or sorry, 7 out of 8. No, in 9 out of 10
Mhm.
countries have it as part of their 8. So that's kind of expected, I think. The interesting part is when you get a little closer into it, I think, and you look at the actual distribution of the sub factions, kind of the
Mm.
task. Marines have quite a bit of Ironstorm in there, and then a reasonable mix of kind of pressure combat armies, which is kind of interesting with Blood Angels and Black Templar and Gladius
Mm.
and stuff like that. So but a lot of Ironstorm. A lot of people are really into Reaper, Gladiator Reapers right now.
Yep.
This being our particular Space Marine aficionado for this event, also being into it. And so seeing a lot of those is, I think, something that it's starting to see an uptick. I think we're starting to see more and more between, Ennis and Alex Harrison, for example, playing it a lot too.
Yep. Yeah, definitely. I think, these two have really interesting breakdowns, Space Marines and Necrons. So we played against a USA, and they had the Ultramarines, Gladius up and down list. Sorry, Vanguard, I guess, right? Up and down list
Mm.
with, the same similar variant to basically what John Lennon played at the World Champs, but instead of that unit of aggressors that went up, they swapped all of those into Eradicators. Kind of, what are you liking in terms of that list? Because I see we've got some of those. I think one of those there. Oh no, there is no Vanguard.
Yeah, no,
But what do you think? Where would you, if you had to submit, would you go Ironstorm or would you go Gladius Hybrid Black Templar?
So that's actually one of the things that I think is most interesting about the Marine builds is I don't think there's a right answer.
Mm.
I think it depends on the rest of your comp, because you can make an argument to play 4 to 5 different Marine builds that
Mm-hmm.
are all equally good in different ways and do different things to your matrix.
Mm.
Unlike, say, when we get to Necrons and we talk about Hypercrypt and Canoptic, I think there is actually a bit of a leader there.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I think that's actually one of the really interesting things about Space Marines, and is a sign that it was actually designed pretty well.
Yeah, I think actually Space Marines have had the largest amount of of kind of sub-faction differentiation between what is actually playable, right? Out of any codex that's probably been released,
Mhm.
Necron's probably being second there, where they had like kind of three. Obviously, it's a bit easier because there's so much good stuff in that codex, of course, as well. So I think they hit the nail on the head with Space Marines as well. I'm a fan. Are you a fan of Storm Raven Gunship or no Storm Raven Gunship?
I think it's fine. I think it's better than a lot of people give it credit. I've noticed a lot of people reading the data sheet and being a little dismissive of it, but
Mm-hmm.
I actually think it's, especially in Iron Storm, it's quite a
Mm.
bit stronger than people are giving it credit for.
Yep.
I think putting too many of them is a bit too many eggs in one basket. Playing on WTC terrain with some of the ways that WTC rules interactions work, being that your plane can't, for example, overhang any of the ledges of a given
Oh,
ruin, which is pretty huge.
I didn't
Um,
know that.
yeah, actually makes having multiples of a given plane really hard to use. But one plane is very much usable. Um,
Ah,
so I
so
think
you actually to interject right there, you can't drop a dreadnought across a ruin on the other side. Then, if your plane wing can't overhang it, I take it right.
yeah. So your wing is not able to overhang the levels. The base, the footprint of the thing is fine,
Yeah,
but the levels of the ruin, your wing can't like say you can't deep strike in a position where maybe you're overhanging that, and that's
yeah,
a rule I think that WC introduced to stop you from sticking a wing over a wall to
I
be able.
see. Yeah, but a lot of people, I think, a lot of people get this wrong in that they start the Storm Raven off the board. I think actually one of the strongest variants is to start the Storm Raven on the board because it moves 20 inches, and WTC terrain, is such that you can move 20 inches and basically see any position that you want. I think, especially with a giant flying aircraft. So I'm a fan of Storm Raven gunship. I think it's a really good case study, I think, in terms of a teams build of what is good for teams. And the Storm Raven gunship and aircraft, it really allows you to push differentials because when you get the foot up and you start to table your opponent, it has the reach across the board to just actually hit the deeper spots where your opponent might be able to get those, last remaining points with. So it has a really good, it gives you a really lot of forward momentum pressure in terms of closing opponents out. But once again, obviously, that's quite matchup dependent. So requires a little bit of babysitting. Obviously, you don't want to run into like any MSU Elder, for example, right?
Yeah, I think that's generally true for Iron Storm. Not as much as I think people assume that
Mm,
needs a ton of babysitting, but I do think it needs a little bit, and I think that's mostly because of the fact that when it gets a good table, it just blows the door off its opponents. It's
yeah,
so good on a good table, and
yeah,
so that babysit, like if you do a little bit of babysitting, you get rewarded significantly.
yeah.
Like,
Most, yeah, which is a great. You put it really fantastically. If you do a little bit of babysitting, you get a big reward, which is exactly what you want in a team matrix, right?
mm,
Which maybe teams should be thinking about ways that they could tackle this build because it seems so prevalent. I wouldn't be surprised if this build is one of would be one of the most popular if we submitted for WTC tomorrow. I think it's obviously all players basically have access to Space Marines in general, right? So I think it'd be very popular. Necrons
mm.
as well, of course, and I guess Guard as well. Moving on to the other two, we've got an interesting breakdown between Canoptic Court and Hypercrypt Legion. So 9 out of 10 teams taking Astra, Space Marines, and Necrons. So one of these teams not taking one of each. Now, I kind of guess the two notable teams here are Germany doesn't have Astra, and our team doesn't have Necrons. Now, I think you could look at this and say, oh, are these guys like seeing something we're not? But oftentimes it comes down to the fact that the one specialist on your team just can't go and play the tournament, right? So I think it's fair to say for WTC that likely Astra, Space Marines, and Necrons would be filled out across the board, 100% guaranteed, right? You could beat your Leaf League on that.
I would be surprised if a team didn't take it. They'd have to have a really good reason for it.
Yeah, exactly. So Necrons, Canoptic Court, and Hypercrypt. Now we've actually been playing Hypercrypt Legion in our team, and I've been a bit of an advocate for Hypercrypt for teams in our team Ignite, and for Team New Zealand as well. We've got a fantastic player called Jonty, who is a kind of Necrons aficionado, playing the double monolith build. I still think the double monolith build is the better build, and it's kind of for the same principles as the BT Ironstorm Storm Raven gunship build, right? You could do a little bit of babysitting, but it can give you some matchups where it absolutely crushes. And it's a list that actually has a decent or slash good winning pairing into sisters, which are a very popular draw small win army that basically can go against absolutely anything, right?
Yeah, I think I personally think that Canoptic is the stronger build, but I
Hmm.
don't think it's particularly far ahead. Um,
Okay.
for me, the leading motivation for this is the consistency and the fact of Canoptic Cord and how it just plays Warhammer really well.
Hmm.
It does what it does extremely well. It's very few matchups that are actively bad and has some good matchups into armies which are otherwise rather troublesome.
Yep.
So for example, like Guard is a good example of this, I think.
Yep.
Um,
For sure.
and It's just hard to ignore the results of people like Josh Roberts putting up like 5 tournament wins and
Yeah.
almost as double as many weeks or whatever. It's just the list is just incredibly efficient.
But it begs the question of, is that what you require in a teams event? Is it a list? I mean, the games I had against Josh Robert were pretty close, 13-7 or whatever like that, and it was swinging into a potential win for me. Kind of, one key turn, we both throw dice at each other. But actually, on the flip side, I played the monolith build against Nassim at the ITT, albeit different terrain formats. But I think obviously the monolith is better on WTC, and I had a 180 point of useless destroyers. But we kind of played that, and I think I won 11-9, 12-8 or something like that as well. Which both I guess are good into guard regardless, right?
Yeah, no, that's definitely true. I mean, I think that one of the things that Necrons does in the team's context, as opposed, and this is a difference between Hypercrypt and Canoptic. Canoptic Court, it's extremely good in singles because it gets across the line consistently,
Mm.
right? I mean, it's consistently winning the game,
Mm-hmm.
regardless of the circumstances, right? In teams, though, how big of a win you have is really important. And
Yeah.
so, in that sense, I think that Canoptic has a higher floor and requires like almost no babysitting in pairings, and that's very valuable in some ways. But by the
Mm-hmm.
same token, to your point, Hypercrypt, especially if it's played well with a little bit of babysitting, is really strong. So it starts to get into kind of a question, and I think for the most part, you see this year where all the teams that took Canoptic Court took Ironstorm, and for the exception of like maybe
Ah,
and so, you don't have two armies here that are requiring table pick.
yeah, it's true.
So I think that's
It's
probably an interesting, little.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I guess if you have a lot of consistency in your Matrix lineup already, like maybe you've taken Sisters, Death Guard. Well, you're probably taking that anyway, right? And another Sisters, Death Guard, Custodes. Do you take the Ironstorm BT and you take Hypercrypt as well for that extra bit of spice, right? Are you taking Astra, Ironstorm BT, and Hypercrypt, which is going to have a huge amount of potential output in all three matchups?
Mm,
Or are you taking Canoptic Core to make sure that your Ironstorm BT and your Astra are going to get better pairings, for example, right? Because it will often come down to you potentially having a choice between one of those of those three armies, which are you going to put forward as your third defender slot, probably,
yeah.
as Modison will probably be attacking. Yeah, it's interesting. I think the Hypercrypt Legion builds that are incorrect are the non-monolith builds, actually, which is quite bizarre because there's a lot of non-monolith Hypercrypt Legion builds there, actually. I don't think.
What a time to be alive, where the monolith builds are the correct Necron builds.
Yeah, and not even one. Two monoliths, mate.
You know?
Two monoliths, 30 immortals. Let's go. Yeah, super strong. So, yeah, it's kind of an interesting divide. It's basically a 50-50 divide between the player base there, between Hypercrypt and Canoptic Core, which is a really good analysis of why you would pick one over the other, actually. Maybe if you're the listener thinking about a team's tournament, do you have those armies that are going to be able to soak matchups? Like, have you got consistent armies like Death Guard and Sisters and Custodes, maybe? And then you need a big heavy hitter, then roll Canoptic, then roll Hypercrypt with two Monolith maybe, or Ironstorm BT with two Storm Ravens. One Storm Raven is enough, I think, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a really good point in terms of your combination of matrices. You don't actually want a team composition that just has all drawish matchups. Like, oh, all of our matchups are good in singles. We're all good singles lists. Well, a lot of the time that's actually not an ideal matrix. You want to actually, some of the better armies, and we'll get to them, because there's a couple of spicy ones here. Some of the better ones have a bunch of terrible matchups, but a bunch of really good matchups. And if you babysit them a little bit, then you're going to be getting fours instead of a place where you're never going to get that to anyway. So there we go. Moving on down. No surprise. I think Custodes are, the next popular one. I think Custodes are really strong right now. I think it's interesting. I remember looking through the teams. The vast majority of them are just 30 dudes, as I call it. In our matrix, I've just put all dudes on lots of lists. Whereas I think Jack Hubster for our team is playing 2 Calidus Grav Tanks, which gives his list a lot more play into a wider field. So I think that's accepting the role that Custodians are not really an army that is just going to be stomping one thing or another. And his matchup into Wraiths is probably still good with 2 Grav Tanks, I take it.
Yeah, I think so. I think the grav tanks aren't hurting there. What the grav tanks tend to do is make it so your good matchups are a little bit less good, but your medium and bad matchups are much better. So it
Mm.
tends to even that out. And I think that there's a tendency for custodian players in the U.S. to play Caladiuses for some reason, and in Europe to not. And I think that a lot of European players attribute that to player place terrain, when in reality, I don't actually think that's necessary. I think that one thing that's going to show after the end of this weekend is that you can play Caladiuses quite fine on WTC terrain, and they're very effective.
Yes, we felt the effectiveness of that in the Ignite versus USA scrim. Was surprisingly good, actually. Definitely good against armies. It definitely makes a lot of your army. I would be interested. I mean, it's probably not going to happen. Here's a good example of the way you think about team matchups too, and your list design, which is really important. I immediately thought, I wonder how that does into guard, like custodians with 2 Calidus into guard. But then I instantly thought, well, that matchup's never going to happen anyway, so it doesn't even matter how what you think of that. So a little bit of a side derivative point. It's obviously really important to think about. Okay, my list is going to be really bad against this, and not worry about that, because the reality is you're never going to play against that. So try and amplify the things you are good against, and maybe make those ones that you can improve a little bit better. So I think the Calidus Grav Tank is a good example of that, where it's a smart decision to play into the field based on your team composition as well. There, right?
Yeah, I'm kind of wondering if we're gonna start to see a downtick in the number of custody players um,
Mm.
that are seen in teams, mostly because I think you actually don't see very many pressure armies, like proper, melee pressure armies, out of European teams as we get towards the end of
Yeah.
our team comps we are in. I think that the custodies are particularly deadly and good in those matchups, and if
Mm-hmm.
most of your opponents aren't running those armies, it's less of an incentive to take an army which is otherwise susceptible to a couple other ones, such as Astro Militarum or Thousand Suns, which can
Yeah.
just bunkle on that army really hard. So
Yeah.
it'll be
Or
interesting to see if that ends up materializing, or if that kind of safety valve is always something teams feel like they need.
yeah, I feel like any big monophase shooting army is going to be pretty powerful against custodians in general, isn't it? Really, like I mean, the Stormraven gunship, Ironstorm, double monolith is absolutely horrendously good into custodians as well. So I think it's maybe a bit of a hot take there that maybe custodians aren't going to be the pick in the eights. I could definitely see that. Maybe swapping that out for something like a weird flex pick, like maybe Tower is good, or maybe like Endless Swarm is good, for example, or
I think that's
something
what's
like that, right?
interesting about the teams right now is you have a top end, and you probably even have like a five, maybe six armies that are probably one, and we kind of see that with this distribution here. But after that, I mean, there are so many armies which are legitimately viable.
Yeah.
That when you start to have something like Custodies, and you're like, hey, are we actually getting value out of this? You can slot in so many different armies to take its spot that you get a ton of value out of as well.
Yeah, and getting value needs to come as to what your purpose of your army is and your function and your role, right? Like if you're a melee pin, well, how many times are you playing against your melee mirror matchup? Because they're just going to discard you as the attacker anyway if it's that bad, right? So how much are you often actually getting into that? And so what is your value then? Are you then becoming second defender, third defender for someone that can play like an all comer list, which I guess the 2 Calidus Grab Tanks is pretty much something close to that. So yeah, it's an interesting point because an army that is so popular and obviously very popular in singles as well. And in fact, the top 5, 6 here is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 to Eldar is pretty reflective, I think, of the singles meta right now, right, in terms of popularity. I think obviously Guard being the exception there, it's less popular than Sisters and Eldar, but regardless, the strength is reflective of the popularity for teams to a large degree, I think, right?
Yeah.
Moving along, Death Guard. I think just super strong at the moment. They're a great all rounder list in my opinion, and what they do like though is the ability to push a differential quite big. So it's not the role that they're going to be fulfilling. But a lot of teams obviously still chose to pick it. It's a pretty easy army to stand up go with. So a lot of people have those models in addition. So it's actually a little bit surprising that this isn't more popular, or uh, that only 7 teams out of 10 have picked it. To be honest with you.
Yeah, this is the actually Death Guard are kind of the pivot that I would expect for a lot of people on teams to make if they were to start to cool on Custodians, is to be more
Yep.
hotter on Death Guard, because Death Guard provide a worse answer. It's not going to dunk on melee pressure armies as well, but they're still very good into them and favored into them, while
Hmm.
also giving you a better matchup against the things that Custodians are really bad into.
Yep.
So I think Death Guard are in really well positioned right now.
Yeah, definitely. If you're looking to get on a team, or want to add value, and Death Guard are an army that you've got in the closet somewhere, just get some models together and put on the table. It's a really good. You can play first defender, and I think Death Guard actually has quite a depth of list building, doesn't it? Like, there's actually quite a lot of flex in that last 500 points where you can decide: do you want to have more counter melee? Do you want to have more shooting variants? Do you want to play Predator Destructors, or do you want to play more Plague Marines, for example? Do you want fights first or not? Which is really useful in a team environment, right? Because you can actually directly fulfill a role.
I agree. I think one of the biggest issues Death Guard face is that they're often rather ally hungry.
Mm,
And right now, that's kind of okay because it's Chaos Knights and Demons that they tend to want to take. Chaos Knights and Demons are on the lower end of being able to slip into the eights right now. And also, there's not really another Chaos army that wants to take those allies. I think that once we see Chaos Space Marine Codex drop, that very well might change. If that army's viable, they're really going to want to look for demon allies. And then Death Guard are probably going to fall off a decent amount because of that.
yeah, playing mono Death Guard is a little bit more punishing. The Nurglings obviously are really good for doing tactical and doing homers in the middle if you want to take that as well. And if having access to, well, you're probably not taking lone ops with blue scribe changes nowadays, are you? So basically just using Nurglings. Great use of affection there. Yeah, sisters. Now, sisters is something that we chat about quite a bit in our team. We've got Boris Michev and Vic Vijay, both very competent sisters players. Brian's got a pretty um,
Sorry.
he's got a pretty good opinion on sisters, and I think I mirror that to the same degree as well. I feel like sisters are pretty strong right now, right?
Yeah, I think Sisters are one of the strongest armies in the games in the game.
Mm,
They have some hyper efficient units, in my opinion, in terms of point costs
yep,
and their output and ability. And they have what I think is the single strongest armor mechanic in the game. It's offset by a lot of their sisters. A lot of the output of sisters units are generally on the lower side as compared to say like an obliterator or something crazy like
yeah,
that. But adding deterministic outcomes to a game um, is so strong, and we saw it with Eldar. Eldar had the
yep,
combination of strong data sheets with deterministic dice, and um, but still, just the deterministic aspect of the dice, get the advance you need, get the charge you need, pass that battle shock that's really critical, is so incredibly strong. So
yep.
I think sisters are one of the best armies in the game, if top three for teams actually. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Probably, I think it slips actually above Necrons
Cool.
on armies that should be on a team for eight
Yeah.
minutes and 5 minutes.
Yeah, I mean, we're not playing Necrons and we're playing Sisters, but obviously there's a story behind that. But I can't agree more. They seem to have so much stuff, which means that they have such a high floor in terms of points. And that's basically, you can play the list that way. You can play the list to just basically, I'm going to score 88 points, and it doesn't matter if you score 100 because the differential is going to be 12 anyway on the bad day. So, whatever. Your best army, take it 12-8. But and then a lot of times they still have a lot of play to them. The Triumph of Saint Catherine is like crazy good for the number of points it costs. I think almost every army in the game would play the Triumph of Saint Catherine if they just had access to it at 125 points, like 125 points, 2 up, 4 up, 8 OC, 18 attacks.
It's super efficient. I mean, at the core of the army is it's just toughness three, people in power armor, but and their anti tank is meltas, but I think a lot of that is kind of on the surface seems weaker than it is because yes, they're shooting meltas at you, but they're shooting 10 of them at you, right?
Yeah,
And then when one connects, they do 8 damage, right? So it's
yeah,
just like it's they're akin to rats just dragging you down. I think is
yeah.
describing it as. So it is a skill intensive army, though. I will say I think there's a lot of uh, player skill expression in the army. Just not to take away from sisters. I don't think it's just blatantly busted.
Mm.
But I do think maybe it should be toned down just a smidge.
Yes, they seem to have got the new fate dice. Now that we're playing with 6 fate dice, which is still good. They're playing with many, many more. Fantastic. Sisters, and then we've got Eldar as well. So Death Guard, Sisters, and Eldar, all the same amount of popularity. 7 teams out of 10 taking them. I'm actually kind of surprised that there's not 10 Eldar because of how popular Eldar have been throughout the course of 10th edition. I would have thought that almost every team would have an Eldar player, and I think Eldar are still really good. Obviously, they're not as powerful as before, and I think they're a bit more susceptible to the top end of the meta right now, right? Guard, Necrons, potentially Custodes, Death Guard Sisters. Like, they're not crushing these games. But yeah, what are your take on? Obviously we both played Eldar, but you've played a lot more than me. What's your take on the best kind of Eldar build right now? I noticed that some teams are playing Avatar of Cain. I think Gito, sorry, is it Gito or Duda is playing. Duda is playing 2 Falcons and a Wave Serpent, for example.
Dude is
Um,
yeah. Dude likes to play some wild old army. He's always ahead of the curve, which is pretty cool.
yeah. What would you play if you were submitting?
I think that if we're starting to see any kind of outer lists kind of solidify, if you will, in terms of archetypes, what's really coming to be true is just stuff, right? You just take a ton of aspect warriors
Yeah.
because they have great core rules, they're fast, and they can use fate dice and also the strats that are really effective. And so they're all really cheap, between 75 and 85 points for the most part, with data sheet rules that are really strong.
Yep.
And you just take a ton of them, right? You have 12 units of aspect warriors or something. I mean, not that many, but it's
I think they have more than that too. I think they have like 15 or 16, depending on what you're playing.
units. So
Yeah.
generally, I think you tend to see a bunch of D cannons to control some space. You see not so much light spinners anymore, which I think is probably the right choice. And then you see units of stuff, and sometimes we'll take the avatar. I personally think just taking more stuff is better.
Mm-hmm.
I'd rather just have more things than one thing, which is good, that you have to get value out of and activate into, and can be vulnerable against certain matchups. The avatar is
Yeah.
really strong in certain cases, but I just want to play, behind enemy lines and homers and get 35 secondary points for free, anywhere 35 to 38 secondary points for free,
Yep.
and then move block and play the mission and just play good, strong, fundamental Warhammer and end up winning the game because of that, which is what Eldar I think is really good at right now.
Yeah, so even in your bad matchup, you can take behind enemy lines and homers, dump all your CP into doing that basically every single turn, and as long as you're holding, maybe one objective, you've got a pretty high floor there as well. And then, so in your worst matchups, you can do that, and in your good matchups, you've obviously, those are your good matchups where you've got an MSU skew that has a huge amount of volume, so potentially good against, and speed obviously, so potentially good against some slower melee units. Nice. Now, between after that, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That's 7, and then obviously the take-home message here is that most of the teams are taking some kind of combination of Astra Militarum, Space Marines, Necrons, Custodes, Death Guard, Sisters, and Eldar, and then there's kind of one flex after that. If you were gonna pick one of the remaining, what would you pick to round out your 8 here, Brian?
With the makeup of the other 7, I'd probably want to be looking for an army which can really dunk on the right kinds of matchups. So I'd be
Mm-hmm.
considering something like Thousand Suns. I think is a really interesting choice here
Yep.
because Thousand Suns, a correctly made Thousand Suns matrix looks like a stoplight, right? It's green and it's red.
Yep.
When you get the green matchups, you get the green matchups. You're just gas,
Yeah.
and then you just protect from some of the reds. So I actually think Thousand Suns are probably a really good spot.
Yeah, I can't agree more. Actually, that was exactly what I was going to say. Thousand Suns do seem to be very pilot dependent, though. So you really need someone who knows their matchups. You need them to know if this is a 4, it's a 4 because of X, Y, Z. And if this is a 2, it's a 2. And you know, typically speaking, because obviously we have Liam VSL that plays in our team, his matrices are 2s and 4s. There's not a lot of 3s in there in general, so it's obviously quite a binary army. But I think being a binary army is actually potentially a very powerful position to be in teams. If you've got 2 or 3 all comers, all takers, and then 2 that are maybe counter meta, and you've got stuff like T Suns rounding stuff out like that, then you've got the opportunity to line up your 4s where you see fit as well. So T Suns would be a great pick for me. Votan actually have three. I know you played Votan previously. What's the kind of state of that army right now? Because it's pretty unpopular. I haven't seen it in a tournament for a long time as well.
So yeah, I think the problem with Voton right now is that they're playing a really fair game.
Hmm.
So what they're trying to move 12 inches and get around a corner to see you. They're doing a little bit of scouting and then kind of moving 12 inches with their transports and maybe trying to get an angle, or they're
Hmm.
running at you from behind a wall with a guy that moves 5 inches. Um, they're an army which can score really well passively, which is nice, and I do think is good. But it's an army which, if you are putting it on the board, you're telling your opponent you get to play your army and do your army rules as much as you want to. And I'm hoping that that's not good enough to beat me. And I think a
Yeah.
lot of the armies right now, it's good enough to beat them.
Yeah. Yeah. The their footprint is quite large as well, so they are relatively susceptible to. I mean, bad boards. Votan are. You're just basically in the middle of nowhere. If your objectives are on the open, then your Sagittars and Hecton land fortresses they have to be in the open. And if you're against an army like I don't know Ironstorm BT, then okay, scoop them up and go home, mate, because that's going to be a quick game. Yeah, so I think they're susceptible to what is popular right now as well, which is a lot of a lot of direct shooting armies, and then Guard obviously have the Kaskin too, which just eat Sagittars for a living. So yeah, pretty susceptible to that. Katans are obviously, I guess, relatively good into them as well, but Wraiths are good as well, despite the fact you can grudge token them. I still don't think they've got the output to just get through Wraiths because
Yeah.
at the end of the day, you're maybe shooting las cannons or you've got AP0 on your big
You're
blast
shooting high
guns.
quality, a lot of, with the exception of the Terminator squad and to a lesser extent the graviton squad that you can take, you're shooting
Mm-hmm.
fairly high quality shots at a unit that has a Fiona Pain and a 4 Advance, which is never kind of where
Yeah.
you want to be.
Yeah. Or it could be a lone opt as well, which is
Yeah.
even worse, I suppose. Yeah. There we go. So that's kind of the faction breakdown. I don't think there are any surprises. We've got two GSC players. I think that is a surprise. One is, I think, from the Netherlands. Yep, one is from the Netherlands, and one is obviously Meissen playing it. You're the only Orc player. What are your thoughts on Orcs right now? I don't think to be honest with you, Brian, Matrix doesn't look too great.
I think it depends. I think orcs have a really good matchup in a couple armies that are really interesting. I think they're
Mhm.
solid into a lot of the marine builds. I think they have a favorable flip into guard. I think
Yep.
they beat they beat the Necron builds. Um, we're going to ignore Custodes and Death Guard. Uh,
Yep.
and that's kind of like, so I think you've got some great matchups. You got some medium matchups, but orc pressure armies, and this is kind of pressure armies in general. I think one of the reasons why I like them so much, and this is true for World Eaters as well, is they're really good at that about the fact that they can pressure, right? They don't have
Mm.
to. So you can sit there and play a passive game, fight, looking for a 10. And then if your opponent makes a mistake, poorly executes a move block or gets a little bit too close with something, suddenly you can just crush them and get a huge score out of it. But you don't have to. And then as long as you're threatening the ability to do that, your opponent has to play really carefully. A
Hmm.
lot of times, like for example, the Eldar game is a bad matchup if I try to win the game and the Eldar player plays it correctly. If I don't try to win the game and I play like say three objectives, the middle and my home and the side, it's actually really hard for Eldar to get a score that's decent because suddenly now they have to push into me, which is not a recipe that they really want to do. They don't want to push into orcs being behind walls and trucks if they can avoid it. They want to stop me from being able to pressure them.
Yeah, yeah, makes sense. Do you like World Eaters as the? Would you put it in an 8-man lineup if you could?
It depends. Do I have Anthony Vanilla on my team? I think Anthony is on a different level with that army. And I think that's kind of why we're seeing, for example, me with orcs and Anthony with world eaters as for the most part, the only representations there.
Yep,
Dino also in world eaters.
yep,
It's just because we have so much experience with the army, and it's something I think that I mean, speaking for myself, Dave, and I think you and I generally had the same take from ITT recently, is that there's so much more value in playing an army that and you can matrix correctly for than playing an army which is better but you have less reps in
yep,
terms of both your matrix being accurate and thus your pairings being good and you playing the game correctly and playing the game well.
yep.
I think that World Eaters and Orcs with Anthony and I fall into that category really nicely.
100% agree. And I think one of the big takeaways for this WTC, I think, I'm going to say it now, is that faction experts are going to be at an absolute premium, or knowing your faction inside and out is going to be an absolute premium for this event, where the games are going to be, where the meta is such that, for example, like last WTC, oh, you get played into a Wraith Knight. You're playing for a 2, mate. Like, okay, great. Or whatever, right? You're playing for a 4 or something like that. And even in the top tables in these big games, I remember Lesu against Manijima, 20-0, right? Like, obviously, both fantastic players. It's like, look, there's no play here. So in a meta where it's a lot closer, knowing the ins and outs of your army with like deep amount of reps, 50, 60 games is actually a huge benefit, such that it can be a lot better than having a 10% increase in kind of perceived raw army strength, so to speak, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I think that um, the more team events I play, the more I come to believe that pairings is entirely about the data, right? I mean, the
Mm.
actual pairing process, I think it's important. I think that some people can be a little bit better at it than others, but I think that it almost entirely comes down to data. You
Mm-hmm.
almost universally in team events, both teams come out of it being like, "I crushed that shit," you know.
Yeah.
And the reality is that one team might have had good data, the other one might have bad. Maybe you were some were right, some were wrong. But
Yeah.
if you are the team with the good data and you come out of it, thinking you got one win and four draws, and you get a win and four draws, you win the round. While if you come out of it with bad data, thinking you have two wins, a draw, or something like this, and then those wins end up becoming draws or losses, you could draw or lose the round. So it's all about the data that's backing you up and the prep that goes into it. I think so,
For sure.
which is
I
I think
think
one of the strengths of Poland that's been true for the last couple of years. They've had really really good data, and I think that's shown in the results.
Yeah, I think you're right in that pairings, as more, I guess, more people get introduced into the team environment. There's multiple ways to come to the same conclusion. I don't think pairings is necessarily the most difficult thing to do, right? Like, it's pretty solvable, and with the amount of experience with that people have nowadays, obviously there's still skill in pairing, like, and how you analyze things, of course, um, but the gains that you get out of being a fantastic pairer versus actually having good information, it's much more important to have good information, because there are some stages in the pairing process that it's obviously that you should pick these two factions, for example, or so to speak, especially when you get enough high quality players around the table.
Yeah.
It's very rare that someone comes to a conclusion that no one else thought of, that was like, oh, that was actually the right thing to do. I mean, we're probably a little bit blessed. We are in our team. I think we have like basically 8 people that can do pairing. So
It's like a
uh,
melting pot of the best team in the world.
yeah, exactly.
It's really
Uh,
actually, yeah.
cool. Let's go on to some of the lists. Maybe were there any that really struck out at you?
Um,
Big innovative ones. Otherwise, I can take the guard question, I suppose.
yeah. Why don't you start with guard?
Yeah. So there's a bit of deviation in guard. There is one person's list which I really liked actually. I think his name was. Where was he? Christian Domberg, I think, is from Netherlands. I think this guy's list was really good. Look at this. Just look at this list. This is a good list. Leontis, Tank Commander, Ursula Creed, Infantry Squad, 2 Basilisks, 15 Bulgaren, 12 Bulgaren, 30 Kaskin, 3 Manticores, and 2 Scout Sentinels. He's got a lot of stuff in there. This seems like a really good build. I remember when I read this list, I was like, how does he have so much stuff in there? And comparing it to my own list, and then I realized, swap this and swap that out. Seems like he's got almost everything here. I'm not sure if playing 5 indirect pieces is the best. 3 Manticores, 2 Basilisks. Well, we're going to see who comes out after this event, but I personally like 2 Basilisks, 2 Manticore, and a bit more utility. But he's also got 12 Bulgaren that he's slow walking with the 6-inch order. So, yeah, a lot of stuff in this list. I kind of like it.
Yeah, it's a cool list. I think I personally am a fan of the three Manticores. I think you use your critical mass there, where the variance gets smoothed enough for the
Yep.
shot count that that's in a good spot. But
Yeah, I can totally see that. And I think the indirect is really what can enable you sometimes to push a bigger differential as well.
mm,
If you get, you go first in some matchups, 5 pieces versus 4 pieces, obviously it's nice. So yeah, definitely really interesting. And you get 12 Bulgaren in that list, which is, it's great. So big fan of that list. This is the Poland list, which is playing it's all kind of the same-ish flavor. He's playing a command squad in this one. Sorry.
So speaking of indirect,
Yeah. 20 Kaskin in this one, but two Medusa carriage batteries. So two Medusas here, two Manticores, and two Basilisks. So six pieces here. The Polish special, it would seem, playing the heaviest amount of indirect. I'm not a big fan of the Medusa. I've just found it so bloody unreliable. I think I've had it once do something really good. But yeah.
I'm not either, but I do like respect out of Skark. So
Yeah.
I'm very curious to see how it does, and to kind of maybe ask him if he thinks it was better than say a third Manticore, for example, something
Yeah.
along.
Definitely. Yeah, that's. I mean, they're all kind of the same flavor of that. I think. No one is playing anything like super spicy. There's a couple of people playing two tank commanders. I'm playing the Lehman Russ battle tank, which is the full rerolls to hit against a unit that is on an objective. So we're gonna have to see how that one goes. Kind of like that one. I was this close to submitting 10 Rough Riders, which I'm not gonna lie, right? They're actually not that bad, but I think maybe I'll have to do some convincing before I submit it to a tournament. Yeah. What about anything else? Maybe let's look at Liam VSL's list. Thousand Suns. Maybe
There's
if you were
some
a
mix of
thousand
here, yeah. So Liam's list is where's his fighters?
versus fighter.
So Liam has it's a fairly standard list that Liam tends to run. So it's got triple Infernal Master, Magnus, double Sorcerer, Exalted on Disc, and Ahriman.
Mm-hmm.
And the double Sorcerer is really interesting. I think he's got like five or six.
Five Marines, yeah, and
Rancors,
two right. Oh, one Rhino. Yep.
a Rhino, and some scoring stuff. The double Sorcerer is actually really interesting because I think that against guard, a lot of people for the guard side, and Dave, maybe you can illuminate this a little bit, would look at this list and say, I absolutely destroy it. It's 25 tactical Marines. Give me two turns, and it's going to be off the board.
Yeah.
But the sorcerers, the pair of them, add a really interesting dynamic. So where it's actually you're able to score a pretty reasonable primary because Thousand Suns are still just generally really hard to push into because they can activate so much damage at any given time. And if you're trying to push into them, you're trying to stand on their objectives. And if you stand on an objective against a Thousand Suns Space Marine, you do it for until their shooting phase is over. I think that in that sense, like I've played the matchup maybe 4 or 5 times, and I've been able to get a draw out of it every single time, and I'm always surprised. It doesn't matter how many times I've played it. I'm always like, I got a draw again. I don't know how, but I think it actually might just be an army which could be a sleeper into those kind of scenarios.
It's interesting, isn't it? So what I would say is Liam's build here has got 5 Marines, 2 Sorcerers, but only 1 Rhino. So there is one hanging squad here, right? If I'm missing something.
I think Armand tends to not join a unit now.
Yes, but there is 5 Rubik Marine squads, right? 1,
yes.
2,
2
3,
Sorcerers,
4, 5. Yeah.
And then the Disc and Armand tend to be separate.
Yeah, so there is going to be one targetable squad, obviously, unless you leave that in like Rapid Ingress or Outflank, for example, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a tough one. It begs the question, right? So from a player who doesn't play Thousand Suns, but I have a big collection of them, it kind of looks like 2 builds. You can go triple Sorcerer, double Rhino, and have a good game into a shooting variant list, or you can go more damage and push your list or push your matchups that you would otherwise beat like a 3+. You're turning those into 4s, for example, right?
It's kind of interesting because I feel like the more games. So I played for listeners for some context. I played Thousand Suns at WCW last year, and I played. There was a lot of indirect in the meta at the time, so obviously I made a brilliant decision to play them. But as the tournament went on, I began to respect that indirect less and less because I began to learn that if you shoot indirect at say an Infernal Master squad, the ability to flip a dice into a 6, to reroll with a Cabal point, to then blanket damage, there's a pretty reasonable chance that you're going to have an Infernal Master left alive at the end of that indirect shooting, and that Infernal Master is 2/3 of your Cabal ritual points. So it's you actually can, to a certain degree, disrespect the indirect, because the way you're going to play your game is you're going to use your tools that they can shoot to score secondary points,
Hmm.
while threatening pushing or limiting their ability to push into you. And it's going to take them a reasonable amount of time, as long as you have those assets to try and keep things alive, to actually chew through your units and do enough damage to you that they can actually start to push.
Yep.
And so I think, and it's a bit of a hot take, but I think your 25 tactical Marines can disrespect indirect a decent amount, and actually be okay. Because the thing is that by disrespecting that indirect, you get your army roll, and your army roll is so incredibly powerful with the Cabal ritual points.
Yep.
That's a huge upside.
Yeah, you just obviously you just shoot Magnus with your indirect first, right?
Yes.
um, yeah, so it's interesting. It'll be interesting to see if Liam plays against guard. Obviously, Liam's played guard in practice as well, so it'll be interesting to see how he does. I'm sure he'll do obviously fantastic as well.
Yeah.
Any other like really spicy lists? Yeah, obviously we got
The
Anthony Morgan.
Polish Black Templar list is an interesting one we can look at.
Oh, this is the dudes. Yes, dude, where's my car list? Yeah, this is something that's similar to Ed Watts played a lot of, which is just these huge Primaris Crusader squads, right? That have 4 up invulnerable, 5 up feel no pain, or something like that.
I don't think they're the four vulnerable. They definitely have a 5 Beyond Pain, which is
Hmm.
troublesome to get through.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, a lot of dudes. It's
The
got
Redeemer,
obviously a Land Raider. Land Raiders are pretty damn good on WTC boards. I'm a
the
big fan.
Redeemer is so powerful.
Sorry.
The Redeemer is so powerful. It's incredibly strong.
Yeah, the fact that you can Overwatch it and you can move it and then disembark and then charge is incredibly useful. You got this primary Sword Brethren squad, which obviously I'm going to speak out of turn, but can Hellbrick go in that?
Albrecht,
Sword
yes.
Brethren? Yeah, it goes in the Sword Brethren, right? So that squad basically just deletes anything in the game. So it would be interesting to see if this list actually gets paired into some of these Canoptic Court lists, wouldn't it?
Yeah, so I played this list at Pyra on the
Mm.
Fireworks, and
I'm assuming that didn't go well for you.
oh no, I crushed it.
Oh,
Actually a good matchup for me, but I also, my opponent was a little less experienced with the list than I think
yeah.
perhaps this person is. But the thing that I think is both a good and a bad thing about this list is if you actually look at the list, it looks like it's a decent amount of stuff, but it's really just like 3 real units, right?
Yeah,
You have
too
2
big.
Crusader quads and a brick of Sword Brethren.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and what that means, from say a perspective of like say like me as an orc player, is I can charge one of those bricks, fight it and kill it. Then you can fight and kill me, and I can fight them to death and kill you. So I 2 for 1, with these
Mm.
giant units. It also means they can only be in certain positions at once. If you go wide, it's much easier to deal with you, which I think is a bit of a problem. But I do think this list is really interesting. I think it is good. I just am not. I really want to see how it's played in some other contexts as well.
Yeah.
I think it could be really. Some armies just can't deal with it. I mean, it's a great stat check.
Yeah, some armies just can't deal with it. Although, yeah, I'm not sure if I can deal with it. I don't think Guard can deal with that either, as well. To be honest, depends how many Bulgars you had, but that's a lot of bodies to chew through, and the 5 up with AOC is a lot to chew through. Obviously, the Manticores are pretty good against the Crusader squads with the flat 3 against 2 wound 5 up. But yeah, that's a lot to chew through, and if you go second, you'll be in a real spot of bother. It's kind of like Custody-esque, isn't it?
Yeah.
There's a lot to chew through. Yeah, it's cool. I mean, I guess a lot of teams are converging on very similar things right now. Got one Chaos Knight player here from Team Norway, and yeah, it's looking pretty good. I think the team meta is really healthy right now. It definitely helps to level out some of these singles armies that are extremely stat checky, right? Like
Yeah,
Necrons, for example.
I
You
think
can actually have your own giant stat checker go up against it, and cool, blast them off the board maybe.
one army that might be worth talking about is just, and I think a lot of them tend to be similar, but we kind of skipped it in the other one is Grey Knights. I think we're
Mm-hmm.
beginning to see a shift in how Grey Knights lists are written. Um, because before you'd see nothing but Terminators, right?
Mm-hmm.
Giant bricks of Terminators bouncing around doing tricksy things. And now I think what you're beginning to see, I think this might be
Well, this is all Terminators, but yeah.
maybe look at Poland. Have one
Is
of
Poland playing it? Nope. Maybe. Let me look at another team potentially. Germany.
yeah, Florian. Oh, Florian's list is wild. Actually, I click a little Florian's list. Speaking of a shift in Grey Knights.
This is 3 librarians as well, and 1, 2, 3. Oh, oh, I see.
Yeah,
Canis Rex. Ah, I see. Canis Rex is pointed quite well, and to be honest with you, if you're playing, 6 brigands, then maybe you just play the big guy as well, right?
Yeah, no, this list is so cool. So it's got 3 solo librarians, 3 Nemesis Grandmaster and Nemesis Dread Knights, 1 random Tech Marine, 3 Nemesis Dread Knights, which for those who aren't familiar with the data sheet is quite effective in terms of damage output now with the buffs they've received. And they have a data sheet
Yep.
roll that lets them advance and charge, and then the army roll is they auto advance 6.
Yep.
So
Flat move 14.
fast. Yeah, they're moving fast and they're doing
Yep.
damage. And then he touches it off with a light ally in the form of Canis Rex at 35 points, but he's so effective and so good.
He is. He's actually one. He's obviously basically the only competitive big knight at 435, and he's actually got a very bizarre rule that unless you actually kill the guy that jumps out, you don't get bring it down points
Hector.
for him.
I think his name is Hector.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. The thing, what I would say about this list is, I'm pretty sure it gives up assassinate and bring it down like a ton, right?
Oh, I'm sure. It's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's 18
6.
plus like whatever the big boy is.
7, 28, 32 points in assassinate, and then 6 plus the big boy. Yeah, maybe bring it down is a bit far, but it's interesting. The Nemesis Dread Knights, though, they do do good damage, but they seem a bit soft in their defensive profile, don't they?
I think they're soft to a certain extent. I think that if you can only get lines on one, they actually are pretty like reasonably
AOC.
because you have AOC, you have Mist to keep them from getting charged, and, have a bunch of kind of play there. But I think that if you can get lines on multiples and you get shields down on one of them, you're going to kill it.
Yeah.
Kazakin are a good example where a Kazakin squad can solo one of these guys, which anytime that's true, it's bad news bears.
Yeah, that's not really where you want to be in today's meta, but run up to them, grenade them, melt mind them. Yeah, it's a bit of a tough one. I'm interested to see how Grey Knights do it. Personally, I'm a fan of the 3x5 Terminator, 3x5 Librarian kind of build.
I really like Nemesis Dread Knights. I like the single Grandmaster Nemesis Dread Knight to get the enhancement.
Yep.
The
Inescapable Wrath. Yeah.
Either Escapable Wrath or it's the one that lets you teleport. I thought that's usually what they did.
Sigil of thing. I think he's actually not playing Sigil. That's interesting. Maybe he didn't have the points for it.
Yeah, they're good. They're good enhancements. But and then I like kind of just taking Terminators. What's interesting about this list and Grey Knights list in general is I feel like the way I've always approached Grey Knights is I kill everything but their Terminators. So that all their secondary game plan is terrible. The fact that they're bouncing around already gives them a bit of a sketchy primary game plan. And so now so you can actually outscore them pretty well. With the Dread Knights, what I really want to see is how exactly they're playing the mission. Like how does he play the mission with this? What's the secondary game plan if your opponent doesn't give you kills?
Yeah, I want to think that I actually think Grey Knights are a pretty difficult army to attack into if they just played really passive and they just sit back on objectives and do nothing. That being said, they do need a board for that. Like, if you're a Grey Knight player and you're on the board and you're not table pick, and, like, for example, if this list goes against a table that is objectives in the open, then that's going to be an absolute awful time. Unless your opponent like just walks onto all of them, then you just charge them all. Like, obviously that's probably not going to happen, but I think they can be a bit susceptible to table pick here, especially on table pick where the objectives are in the medium ruins, where they might be hard to hold with a Dread Knight because then you touch the terrain and then you can see the Dread Knight. So yeah, it'd be interesting. Although I guess the librarians can jump on those objectives probably.
But I am just really curious how this list is gonna be over the weekend. This is definitely the hard skew in the other direction. I kind of wonder if he's doing this for the test or have they really found something here, and it's gonna be cool to see.
Probably good against the old Canoptic Court, I presume. Actually, I think Canoptic Court, I could really see that struggling to down like a Canis Rex something, and sometimes Canis just pops off and does a boatload of damage, right?
Yeah, for sure.
There we go. So obviously our team we're not taking Necrons because I refuse to play that. I wanted to play guard. But the one really cool thing I think about our team is that we've got everyone on what is kind of a signature faction for themselves, right? But you on Orcs, we've got John on Tyranids, Anthony on World Eaters, me on Guard. We've got Innes Wilson playing Space Marines, of course. We've got Typhus on Sisters, and Jack on Custodies as well. So really looking forward to it. It'll be really good fun. We'll probably keep you guys updated about how we're doing. We've got Team Luxembourg round 1, which will be great fun. And yeah, I'm thinking if I can bring my laptop, I will additionally try to do a round table with our team, or maybe do some of those YouTube shorts if I can work out how to do that tomorrow afternoon. And, yeah, if you've got any other closing thoughts, Brian?
No, I mean, this is a great event. I just want to thank Ruud, the
Yes.
Dutch captain, for putting it on. He's been putting on for a couple of years. Really excited to have the first one going, first one for me going, and be around all my good buddies. Man, it's gonna be great.
Yeah, it's going to be an absolutely fantastic weekend. Here's Ruud for Team Netherlands, and yeah, if you want to, I guess, follow along, I'll put the link to PCP in the description as well. There we go. Episode, I believe, 47. Brian, it's been great having you on. I'm going to peace out, and yeah, have a good night or evening, morning, wherever you are.